Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Our guest today is Ben Watson. So, Ben, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. My name's Ben Watson. I live in northern New Jersey, so New York City area, and I run a business called 9 Bar Commerce. Within the retail commerce space, we help brands become unforgettable and to bridge that gap from having a great selling product to being a memorable brand, along with my co-founder, Clint Armstrong. Yeah, so that's sort of where we are and what we do.
Awesome, cool. So I'm just curious more about your background. Like, how did you kind of get into this business?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I started in Sydney. I'm Australian, and I used the industry to really travel the world and live in some pretty cool cities and work in some really great jobs, meeting some super smart people along the way. And I got into it almost by accident. I was working in Sydney, just out of university, and I applied for a media job. And I was like, yeah, why not? Let's give this a shot. And I got through the interview and hired, the next week. And back in that day, over 20 years ago in Sydney, digital didn't exist. So I was a TV, print, radio buyer, working on some, big hair care brands at the time and Ferrero Rocher as well, and just having a great time. It was a really cool industry. There was a lot of fun. There was a whole sort of crop of young people came in all at the same time into our agency. We're working in the biggest agency in Australia at the time. And it was a different age, I'd say. And then, digital came in the next couple of years. I jumped onto that pretty quick, and it really changed my whole career, because it became a pathway to move to London, to move back to Sydney eventually. China, I had a stint over there with Mindshare, which was working in Beijing the year before the Olympics. Was a fascinating time and a real lesson in how digital evolves so differently across different markets. And, the people in my team were absolutely fantastic and they just wanted to learn. But at the same time, there was these massive portals that existed, unlike anything we'd seen in the West in terms of the way they combined Messenger and a bunch of other sort of digital functionalities. But they're also very siloed in how they did deals and the type of functionality they would allow from an ad standpoint. So you had to be really sort of careful with how you engage with them and the type of, recommendations you'd make to your client about what could be done. But a fantastic time. And I moved on to Chicago after that and founded a team, on a new bit of business with a bunch of people who were all sort of brought together at MediaCom in Chicago. And once again, this was a client who was not particularly digitally forward, and our job was to help them get there. And, we had a great time doing that with them. They were fantastic partners on that journey. And so on, in other cities like New York, back to Sydney, New York, London again. And now I'm in New York, and commerce just exploded the last 10 years. I mean, Dan, I'm sure it's something you've seen. The industry's just evolved so quickly. And unlike digital, client budgets have exploded along with it. It's not just users adopting commerce, but the budgets that are available and the ecosystem where you have your enterprise clients and all these commerce native brands, filling up the space. I'd say they probably get pretty equal in terms of spending power between the two, but obviously it's different scales in terms of the number of enterprise brands versus the number of commerce natives that exist. It's almost exponential. Anyone can be a commerce native these days. They
Makes
all
sense.
need different advice, right, to get to that next step. So, and I mean, you guys play a huge role in that sort of ecosystem as well.
100%. And so did you move to the States to start this company, or what made you want to, leave Australia and come to the States?
Yeah, so it was just a roundabout way. I'd already lived in London, Beijing, and I was within WPP at the time, so a massive global media network, and really looking for that next opportunity. China is fantastic, but it's a really tough place to live sometimes. I grew up in a subtropical climate on the beach, lots of greenery, and Beijing was not that at the time. Anyway, Chicago just felt like a really great opportunity within a big network. And so I jumped at it. And, the Midwest is actually feels very similar to a lot of just, I don't know, the attitude of Australia. It felt a little bit like home as well, which was great at the time. So, it wasn't a plan as such. It was more a great opportunity that I took a leap for. And really that's where my partner and I feel about the business we're running now. It wasn't planned, it wasn't something we had in mind years ahead of time. It was more, it felt like a great opportunity and a gap in the market where we'd worked with enterprise brands for so many years and we just saw this gap where commerce native brands can have an amazing product, but they just don't know how to sort of make their next step up, and we wanted to sort of be a partner that could bring that enterprise experience to them and help them learn how to sort of grow their brand. Effectively, that's what it is. How do they grow their brand? It doesn't mean throwing millions of dollars at advertising campaigns either. It means really, tightening up those areas and how they engage with consumers. Are they consistent? Are they in the places? Do they know what their most valuable customers actually think about their product? And do they have a conversation with them? And are they seeing people want to choose their brand? Like, do they have preference in market? Are they recognized? Or is it a bit of a look-alike versus other products? So that's what we bring to the table.
Makes sense. So obviously, there's a lot of ways you can help brands. If you can just talk with our audience more specifically about how you kind of work with brands and how you help them.
Yeah, sure. So, within the commerce space, building a brand is very different to an enterprise organization. However, within this space, there's lots of places you can start. Really depends upon, who you are as a business, your culture, and the products that you have. But look, I think it can start from as small a space as your CRM. Do you have a tight CRM program that is just a machine for collecting insights on what your most valuable consumers think about your products? What are they saying about the category? And what are the types of, things you're saying about your own products and your own brand, which is really what branding is, right? It's building a list of evidence. You say you're X, and do you have a list of evidence that supports that claim of X? If you don't, then I know myself as a consumer, it's very hard to believe a brand if I don't see that other messaging in other parts of my life. And so this CRM program, unlike a traditional CRM program where you want to build as big a list as possible, is really about the quality of the people on that list and the conversations that you're having with them. And it becomes a place to seed these sorts of messages and to test to see if they're the type of message you want to take into a wider environment. Can be banner advertising, let's say, to a certain audience where you just have that key message running and you're using that to create preference on a wider sort of, arena. So that's one example. I think another thing, and this is very commerce specific, is utilizing reviews. We have platforms like Amazon, the best source of in the moment feedback on your product. Most brands do not use that and feed it into their product development cycle, and they don't feed it back into their messaging cycle. And, that just sets you up for the trouble down the road. And I think is a really great way to sort of make sure your brand is still on point to what consumers want and how they need it in your lives. And a lot of the brands we talk to are, 2-3 years in, and quite often they don't have that sort of mass or that sort of sophisticated understanding of who they are as a brand. And so they need to be even more sort of aware of what consumers are thinking and saying, particularly as they expand their consumer base, because early adopters might say X, and that's fantastic. You need them to get going, as a brand selling a product. But as you sort of expand that base, you really get into the mass, and mass tends to have very different needs. And if you ignore that, then you're probably not going to get the penetration you really want to get, over time. And so you get stuck in this space. At least that's how we see it. I don't know, what do you think, Dan?
No, I agree.
Does that
I
work?
agree.
Does it sell?
100%. Yeah, you're spot on. And I think when it comes to branding, do you, especially for commerce, is it kind of product dependent? Like, where do you kind of come in when it comes to channels, right? Because there's Amazon, there is retail, there's direct to consumer, there's, other channels now, TikTok. So what do you kind of do from that approach when you are working with your clients?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's probably two things, right? One is consistency of message. we have a tendency to want to have multiple messages in markets, particularly if something feels like it's a flavor of the month. There's a cultural headwind coming in, but consistency is so important when you're trying to establish, who you are as a brand and a product. And so we help clients just with that consistency, that discipline of messaging. And then, we also help them be brave when entering new advertising channels. I think it's a really hard thing sometimes to trust that this channel is going to be incremental to revenue when you're used to running sponsored product ads on Amazon, let's say as an example, right? Or Facebook ads, and the truth is that different channels have different roles depending upon the product you're selling. And even something as simple as outdoor, which, it can be a digital environment, it's quite often a static one, can be fantastic at just making your brand feel larger than life. It puts it into a public space, which gives your brand legitimacy. And it also, allows the brand to feel a little bigger than what it is, while also being local to the place where people intercept that message. And it doesn't need to be boring either. I mean, there's a great Apple campaign from, years ago. They were running it on the London Tube inside the train stations. And essentially it was that campaign where there were photos that consumers, people who owned an Apple phone had taken on their phone of these amazing locales. And it was just a great example of outdoor being transformational, where you could imagine yourself in this other consumer's, basically shoes, and you could see yourself, taking these sort of amazing shots in a pretty drab environment as well. So the images really stood out, and they emphasized the quality of the camera on the phone. Here's the proof, right? And so I think not Apple's an extreme example, but it's just an example of like being brave enough to embrace a channel and to understand it better and to know when it's the right fit for your brand, no matter the size of your brand. And so that's what we bring to the table because, our background very much in digital, but we've also played in these other channels and worked in teams who are cross-channel, for some of the biggest brands in the world. So that's really a bit of that experience and insight that we bring to the table.
Makes sense. Obviously, now we're a little bit over the halfway point here, 2025. So what are you most focused on here for the rest of this year?
I think at this point, we're actually launching a podcast, YouTube podcast this Thursday. We have a couple in the can. I think you're going to come on next week and record a session with us. We're really trying to hone in on, what productizing what we offer a little more tightly. I think, it's been over a year now we've been around, and I think for any small business, you tend to do a lot of what you need to do, when you're getting started. And then you start to understand what is it that you do best and what is it that clients want, and how do you make that all fit together. And so for us, it's really tightening out that sort of marriage of those two worlds, and tightening our story as well, building our brand a little bit better. I think that's our goal for this year.
That's awesome. And that's a great goal. So you've been doing this for some time in this industry for a long time. So if you can share with our audience, I guess, a couple of things, like, just a couple pieces of advice, I guess, first, before you even got into this industry, and also second, before you started this business.
Yeah. So just what I was doing, or what I was,
if you can share like the biggest piece of advice, I guess, in terms of before you started in this industry and also before you started in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I'd say be curious. I've always found the best digital people, the best people to sort of work with and have in my teams and work for are curious. And it's a big filter I've always put on hiring. And I know the times when I didn't apply that filter, and that hiring process did not work out long term. It really didn't. So I'd say be curious, be interested. The commerce world is changing constantly. I think the digital world is just the world around us in general right now, particularly with AI coming up. Don't be scared of it. Develop your radar on what's real and what's not. And it's really hard at times, and it can feel like there's just lots of noise and you can't work out the signal. But the more you sort of tune your radar and listen to what people are really saying, the better you get at working out, like I said, the signal from the noise. And that's sort of my biggest piece of advice in being curious. And sometimes that is a painful process, and you'd rather just sort of wait for the answer. But it's good to have an opinion and good to sort of have it based upon actual knowledge of a space. And the second thing I'd say is just start. I think that's the thing that when I've moved overseas, and I've done it many times, you're never going to have the perfect time or have the perfect situation. And you're never going to know what's on the other side of that border, the other side of that plane. And so you just got to do it. And sometimes it's not going to work out. And sometimes it's really going to suck. Right? But other times it's going to be the best thing you've ever done in your life. And you're going to have an experience that not many people get, and you're going to challenge yourself in ways you never expected. And starting the business has been a bit like that too, right? And I kind of wish we'd started earlier, and I kind of wish there'd been things we'd done, just started and did, and worked it out a bit more. But you can only make the decisions you make in the place you are. And I'd say the other thing is don't have any regrets. You did the best you could do where you were, and live with it and just look forward.
That's good advice. So if somebody's watching this show and they wanted to work with you, wanted to reach out to you, do you mind sharing your website, social media, I guess best ways to get in contact?
Yeah, no, definitely. Thanks, Dan. And I'll send you the links and we can add them to the show notes. But bandbarcommerce is .com is our website. We have a link there to connect with us. You can find me on LinkedIn, Ben Watson. I don't think there's too many Ben Watsons, but I'm definitely on there and I'm pretty active. And just DM me. I'm happy to have a chat at any time, and would love to hear from clients who are sort of stuck, wanting to build their brands and move beyond just being a great product.
So, well, Ben, thanks so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for asking me on. This was great to chat with you.